Burnout doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from forcing what no longer fits. And no amount of rest fixes a life that's out of alignment. Because the exhaustion isn't physical, it's directional. This chapter isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally inhabiting who you already are. Letting the body lead while the mind catches up. Letting movement come before explanation. This video isn't here to give you answers. It's here to offer you orientation. A reminder that life starts when you show up, unfinished but present. And that presence is already enough. For a long time, I didn't really have the word embodiment. I'd heard it in passing. I'd seen it used in books, in talks, in conversations that felt a bit ahead of where I was. But if I'm honest, it always sounded like something you talked about after life had settled down. Something that came after clarity, once you'd cracked the code. And I hadn't. What I did have, although I wouldn't have named it this way at the time, was a sense of memory. A felt memory of how life used to move. Not in a dramatic way, not in everything was working perfectly way, just lighter. There was a period in my life where things seemed to flow, where I woke up with energy rather than resistance, where conversations felt natural instead of effortful, where work felt meaningful even when it was demanding. There was this quiet sense that things were lining up, not because I was forcing them to, but because I was cooperating with something. At the time, I didn't call that intuition. I didn't call it alignment. I didn't call it embodiment. I just thought, this is me when I'm on form. Looking back, it's clear that alignment often arrives before we have words for it, before theories, before frameworks. What I didn't realise then was that this wasn't a past version of me. It was a state I could return to. What's strange is that I didn't lose that feeling all at once. There was no clear moment, no obvious collapse. It happened slowly. So slowly that I didn't notice it happening at all. I moved away from that, not because I made one disastrous decision, not because something blew up overnight, but because I stepped into a life that didn't quite fit me, and then stayed there, long enough that the contrast faded, long enough that I forgot what fitting even felt like. For years, I lived with this low-level sense that something was off. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could easily explain to anyone else. There was no single problem I could point to and say, that's it. Just a grey cloud that followed me around. I kept assuming it was something I needed to fix, something I needed to think through, something I needed to discipline myself through. So I tried harder, I analysed more, I pushed myself to improve, and instead of things getting lighter, everything got heavier. There's a particular kind of tiredness that comes from living against your own nature. You can still function, you can still show up, you can still do what's required of you, but inside you're burning energy just to stay standing. What I didn't understand at that time was that this wasn't a lack of effort, it was a lack of alignment. At some point, and this still feels strange to admit, I realised I didn't really trust myself anymore. Not morally, not emotionally, directionally. I didn't know how to tell if something was right for me. I didn't know when to push and when to wait. I didn't know when to move or when stopping was the wiser choice. That internal compass, whatever you want to call it, was gone. And when that goes, things don't necessarily fall apart. They just lose coherence. You can still function, you can still show up, you can still meet expectations, but you can't be steady in relationship. You can't be confident in work. You can't make clean decisions. You start reacting instead of choosing. You start surviving instead of living. Life keeps moving, but you're no longer steering. What I didn't know how to do was get back to that earlier version of myself, the one that felt more alive, but I could remember him. Even when it's gone from daily experience, most people still remember what it once felt like. A time when life had rhythm, when effort felt proportionate, when meaning didn't need to be explained. And that memory became important because about 2 weeks ago, I made a video where I said something that surprised me as I was saying it. I said, I'm not there yet, but I remember what alignment felt like. That was true. I wasn't embodied, I wasn't settled, but I wasn't lost either. I was orienting. I was standing on one side of something, looking back at a version of myself that felt whole and thinking, right, that's the direction, not a plan, not a strategy, a direction. Then I made another video about time, about how when you're living a life that doesn't really mean anything to you, time disappears, days blur, weeks vanish, you're busy, but nothing lands. And then something subtle started to change, because when you begin doing things that carry meaning, even small ones, time responds differently. It slows down, it expands. You can do less and feel fuller. You can be tired and still satisfied. That was the first real shift I noticed. Not externally, internally. Time began to feel inhabited again. It's often the first sign that something is reorganizing internally, long before circumstances change. And then last week, something shifted again. I realised I hadn't actually lost myself at all. I'd just buried that part of me under years of compromise, under roles that kept things stable, under expectations that didn't really belong to me. I didn't need to reinvent myself. I didn't need to become someone new. I needed to remember how to be me again. Wee Righto, Jolly John, the version of me that was curious, warm, playful, the one who could walk into a room and feel people, the one who moved through life with natural openness. And when that recognition landed, not in my head, but in my body, something softened. There was warmth, there was humility, there was joy, not excitement, not hype, just relief. Embodiment doesn't begin with mastery. It begins with stability, with one honest step, one grounded decision, one moment of acting in alignment rather than obligation. It's not dramatic, it's not performative. It's simply the system starting to trust itself again. And that was the start of embodiment for me. Not years ago, not after decades of wisdom. Recently, honestly, probably about 10 days ago. And that matters because I'm not standing here pretending I've arrived. I'm standing at the first stable step. What changed wasn't my circumstances, it wasn't money, it wasn't opportunity, it was orientation. One of the hardest parts of this process was the loneliness. But I did that intentionally. I stopped fighting the quiet. I stopped panicking about not knowing. I stopped forcing myself to perform clarity. There was a stretch where nothing seemed to be happening. No motivation, no answers, no forward movement, just waiting. And for a long time, I thought that meant something had gone wrong, that I was stalling, that I was failing. Now I can see it was clearing space. There's a reason transformation tends to happen away from noise and reassurance. Caterpillars don't go away in groups to turn into butterflies. Some things can't be done for you. In my case, that quiet stripped away a lot of identities I'd been clinging to. Roles, stories, versions of myself that existed mainly to keep things predictable. They fell away, not gently, but thoroughly. What surprised me was that once those identities fell away, there wasn't chaos, there was space. And in that space, I kept thinking about something I'd come across years ago. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi. When a piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw it away. They don't rush to replace it. They don't try to pretend the break never happened. They gather the pieces carefully, patiently, and when they repair it, they don't hide the cracks. They fill them with gold. The damage stays visible. The fracture becomes part of the design, not something to be ashamed of, something to be honoured. And because of that, the piece becomes more valuable than it was before it broke. I don't think that means the breaking was good, but I do think it means the breaking wasn't wasted. What matters is what happens afterwards, how you handle what's left, how much care you bring to it, what you choose to run through the seams. Some things in life aren't meant to be restored to how they were. They're meant to be reassembled with intention, with honesty, with patience, and with something precious holding them together. And once I saw it that way, what came next didn't feel like rebuilding, it felt like relief. And when they were gone, what was left felt familiar. That's the thing nobody really tells you. Embodiment doesn't really feel like adding more. It doesn't feel like achievement. It doesn't feel like becoming impressive. It feels like becoming lighter. Life doesn't suddenly get easy, but it gets honest. Once I could feel that again, I started trying to understand why this mattered so much to me, why losing intuition had collapsed everything, why regaining it reorganized things so quickly. This is where tools can help if they're used correctly, not as explanations, not as identities, not as solutions, but as mirrors. Frameworks like gene keys or astrology don't tell you who to become. They help you recognize how you already function. They return authorship to the individual instead of replacing it. And that's exactly how they helped me. They didn't give me answers. They helped me recognize how my system actually works. Every person has an internal architecture. Some lead with intuition, some with emotion, some with structure, rhythm, or logic. Problems arise when people try to live outside their own design, usually because they were taught that someone else's way was superior. Embodiment isn't about ascending a hierarchy. It's about inhabiting what actually works. For me, intuition isn't optional. If I don't listen to it, everything else eventually breaks. I can push through for a while, I can override the signals, but the cost always arrives later. My emotions tell me when I'm aligned, joy, warmth, aliveness. And my mind's brilliant at building once those two are on board. That's my architecture. Seeing that clearly made something else obvious. This couldn't possibly look the same for everyone, because I've known people, been close to people, who don't come alive through intuition or uncertainty at all. They come alive when life feels steady, when today makes sense, when things are calm, when there's emotional safety and predictability. For someone like that, embodiment isn't about vision or leaps of faith. It's about grounding. No amount of future promise matters if the present feels unsafe. And that's not a flaw. They're different needs. Confusion begins when one model is treated as universal. I've also worked with people, especially in hospitality, who don't want abstract conversations about purpose. They want to know what they're doing tomorrow, what needs built, what needs fixed, what their hands are for. Give them routine, give them something tangible, give them a job that's done properly, and you'll see them settle. For them, embodiment is competence, mastery, craft, pride in doing something well. Then there are the carers, the ones who feel most alive when they're helping others. They don't want the spotlight. They don't want optimisation culture. They just want to know they mattered. They burn out not because they care too much, but because nobody protects their care. For them, embodiment is usefulness with boundaries. Then there are the stewards, people who walk into a space and things settle. They don't rush, they don't dominate, they don't need to prove anything. But when things get heavy, others orient towards them. They hold perspective, they refine vision, they carry responsibility without drama. For them, embodiment is integrity, authenticity, depth. And then there are the learners, the ones who don't arrive with answers, they arrive with curiosity. They need experience. They try things, they test, they get it wrong. They learn by doing. They get restless if they're stuck in theory too long. They need movement, experience, variety. For them, embodiment comes through living and then reflecting on what they've lived. And once I started seeing all of that, it stopped feeling like an idea. It started feeling obvious. What if the reason so many people feel lost isn't that they lack purpose, but they're trying to live someone else's version of alignment? What if work doesn't need to be glamorous to be meaningful? It just needs to fit the person doing it. What if even basic jobs could be dignified and developmental, with learning layered in rather than dead ends? What if embodiment isn't something you're taught, but something you're allowed to discover? That's the space I'm interested in creating. Not a system that tells people who they should be, but environments where different types of people can recognise themselves and grow from there. This is the early days, I know that, but it feels like the right ground. I'm not at the end, but I finally know what direction feels like again. And that changes everything. And for many people, that's more than enough to begin. So, Slanjiva guys, ciao.